Hello, this is Paul Bartosik, and I'm going to give you an overview of the CloverETL Rollup component. Rollup is a very powerful component. It can do lots of things. Probably you don't want to perform all these functions with this component. There are others to do some of these things. It can sort, it can normalize, it can denormalize, it can partition the data. Things you do want to do with this is it can process each record in a group sequentially, and it can supplement the aggregate component. There are things that you can do with rollup that you can't do with aggregate. This is actually just a subset of the functions that are available within the rollup component. First, init is called. That's called before any rows are processed. You can set up your global variables there. Init group is called every time a new group starts. Update group is called for every record in the group, basically every record in your input set. And update group then can call update transform, which can run multiple times. So you can actually, update transform writes out records, and it can write out records, multiple records. Finish group is called at the end of your group, when the group is finished, and that calls transform, which can also run multiple times and write out multiple summary records. And there's a whole bunch of other functions, including error functions that we won't get into here. So it's a fairly complex component. We're going to simplify things. Since most of the time you're going to call rollup, or you're going to use the rollup component to perform aggregate functions, these are the functions you're going to use. You're going to use init group to begin a new group. You're going to update the group as you go through each record, and then you're going to call finish group, or finish group will be called when you're done, which you'll use to write out one single summary record. Very simple and not too much CTL programming required. The CloverETL aggregate component is a nice component, very powerful but simple. It allows you to get sum, average, max, and min for a particular column in your input. However, it's limited. It cannot perform functions across columns. Now, in our example, we want to get the total for each purchase order. Now, the total requires us to take the quantity times the price for each input record. The aggregate component cannot do that. It can reference, aggregate cannot reference a value from a previous input record. Now, we're not doing that here, but that's something that would allow you to do some, like a running average across input records. It can't do a conditional aggregate. What we want to do, we want to add up all of the taxable amounts for our purchase orders. The aggregate component cannot do that, so we need to use rollup for it. And then something that can be a nasty surprise is that aggregate cannot give you a sum, a total, an average across the entire input record set. It requires a key. So that can be a surprise, and you'll end up using either rollup or possibly the data profiler if you need to get totals across your entire input record set. This is the sample data that we'll use for our example. It's purchase order detail records. It has identity column. It has a purchase order number, a sequence number, which we'll get back to, quantity, price, a yes or no Boolean on whether it's taxable, a description, and then an accounting object code. And this is the output that we'll expect from our rollup transformation, with the total per purchase order and the total taxable per purchase order. So we've created a really simple CloverETL graph. It pulls the purchase order detail in from a spreadsheet. It will do our rollup transformation, and then it's going to write the data right back out to that same spreadsheet, to a different tab in that same spreadsheet. This is the input metadata. These fields correspond to the columns on the input spreadsheet. And this is our output metadata. These are the records that we're going to write to with our summary data. This is what the rollup component looks like. We have the group key, which for us is the purchase order number. We'll be grouping by purchase order number. If we had no group key, if we left this blank, it would give us the totals for the entire input record set. And then the group accumulator is the next line, and that is the summary that we'll be sending to the output port. This is the transformation code to do the rollup. First function, init group, does nothing. We're not initializing the groups. The next function is the update group. Again, this is the function that gets called for every single row, and here's where we're rolling up and adding up the totals. The next function is the finish group, and because this returns true, it tells Clover that it should do on every group finish, it should do the transform function. The transform function is the one on the bottom, which actually returns the values into the summary record. One important thing to note is the group accumulator. Remember, the group accumulator metadata name is summary, and so summary is in the signature of each of these functions. I had to go in there and change it from where it said void metadata. I had to change it to summary so that the transformation worked correctly. So in conclusion, rollup can be confusing. The rollup component can be confusing because there's so much functionality in there that really has been, I think, superseded by other components like normalizer and denormalizer, for example. So there's a lot in the CTL, there's a lot that you're just going to not use. But it's very powerful. It's great for doing aggregates, and I think it'll be really useful. I hope that my presentation was of help to you. Good luck.